Good evening. Just to give it a slightly wider or longer dip back in time in context is, I know at least one person I can see in the audience will be familiar with this because he got involved with us as part of this project, but 2022 we did a project in Brockham. It was a grant funded project funded by the Orchid Environmental Trust through the Community Foundation for Surrey, and the idea was to investigate the possibility of having a parish level nature reserve. So smaller scale than this, but it feeds really nicely into this project, and as part of that process and working with various organisations including Bug Life, was about increasing biodiversity in the parish, mainly through people's gardens. So there's some commonality there as well. That's the area that we surveyed. We originally, the map on the left-hand side is the RH3 code. Originally I wanted to gather data for the whole of the RH3 area, but it turned out that Surrey Wildlife Trust gathers their data and stores it on a parish level. And if I'd wanted it for the RH3, I'd had to have bought 3 surveys. So we stuck with the one, which you can see the front sheet of there. So really interesting data, a lot of stuff about protected species, about sightings across the parish, about habitats, and what's important in the area, which again, this information I've been feeding to Norman to go into the project. And finally, this again links with what Norman and the team are doing, is about partnership working. One of the key successes of our original project, and has carried on, has been partnership working with funders. So Community Foundation for Surrey funded. Waitrose in the middle gave us funding for marketing and promotion of the project, and we got money from the lottery. And the project has gone on now to the fact that I'm now working with Royal Botanical Gardens Kew on their Grow Wild project. So, and they're trying to achieve this across a national scale. So, nice context, a little bit local in the parish. We're now in 4 parishes, but also the process is going on right across the country. So, forest gardening. So you're all here to learn how to build a forest in your garden. Don't worry. You may already have one, yeah, if you're lucky. So, but no, I'll explain more about this. But coming out of those talks was a genuine interest with people for trees and shrubs and how we could incorporate those in more so in our gardens. And why do I do it? I always get asked this. I'm a zoologist. That's my background, and I love animals. And so for me, what I've learnt in all the years that I've been working in conservation is you can't have animals if you haven't got plants, native plants. You can't have native plants if you haven't got habitat. So it's all about creating the right habitat, and you'll see that as we go through the talk. Why garden? Some of you have seen this, some of you have been to my talks, you've seen this. I'll quickly zoom through this, but we're in a bad state. The UK is one of the poorest countries for biodiversity in the whole of Europe, and in fact the world. It's diabolical, but we can do something about it. And I think what got me really geared up on this was it wasn't just about rare species. When I started as a student back in the 70s, it was all about saving the blue whale and the tiger and the panda. Now I talk to people about saving dandelions. Who'd have thought, eh? And because of the dandelions, why am I talking to people about saving dandelions? Because I want food for bumblebees when they emerge from their hibernation, the queen bees. And dandelions, I saw someone ask me, I think Simon asked me, where's your dandelion shirt? Because I had a t-shirt last time with dandelions, whereas I've got an antique fur shirt on at the moment. So, but yes, so it's about providing food. My passion is insects. It's providing them food, and dandelions and snowdrops and those early emerging plants that you can have in your garden and you have in woodlands. They're really important for those queens to get enough energy so they can build their nests and start producing workers. House sparrow. I mean, I'm lucky where I live. We've got an old, someone corrected me at the last talk, I said an old parish boundary. They said it's an old manorial boundary hedge in our garden. So it's been there a long time. We've got about 5 families of breeding sparrows in that thing. But for most places, sparrows are really on the decline. Why? Because they've lost their habitat. And they require dense hedgerows and rambling hedgerows to nest in, to feel safe, away from predators. And from the point of view that I'm passionate about insects, I all share this figure because that's quite catastrophic, really. And from a perspective of you driving around, you'll probably remember driving around in your cars, going camping or visiting, and you'd have to get out, you'd have to wipe down your headlights, wipe your windscreens down, wipe your number plates clean for the number of insects. How often do you do that now? I can't remember the last time I had to do that. So the decline in insects is quite appalling. So what I'm going to talk about today, along with the other talks, is all about how we can redress that. We've got a really good woodland heritage in these parishes. Obviously my data originally stems from Brockham, but it applies to all the 4 parishes. And from a point of view of a conservation perspective, a little bit of jargon up here, just to share with you about how conservationists view our area. So, you may not know what a SAC is, but Special Area of Conservation. It's a designation of protection. It provides protection under law and planning and helps funding. New woodlands and beech woodlands in this area are listed as part of that, mainly on the Mole Gap to Reigate Escarpment SASC, which we actually talk about as Box Hill, don't we? It's the Box Hill slopes and the Betchworth and Brockham lime pits. That's what they're talking about there. But it's the yew and beech woodlands, internationally important, nationally important. The designation below, SSI, is a site of special scientific interest. And you can add to that then that the plateau on the top, which has got clay on it and flints and slightly acidic, beech and oak and ash and yew woodlands. Chalky slopes, you've got box, yew, beech and ash, and then you've got the woodland birds and bats associated with it. I don't know whether any of you go to the kilns at all, but it's one of the best sites for seeing British bats in the southeast. Large number of bats living in the old kilns and the structures there. And then in Brockham Parish we have Betchworth Park SNCI, which is a site of nature conservation importance. So that's a designation slightly down from an SSI, and that's a local one. You tend to find that local authorities. That's Mole Valley, who will oversee that. The SSI is overseen by Natural England. The SAC is overseen by Natural England as well, but is also European in its designation. And from the Betchworth point of view, Betchworth Park point of view, we've got ancient woodlands, non-ancient semi-natural woodlands, I'll explain all these in a minute, and those mature sweet chestnuts. So if you ever walked over that way and you go past the golf course, there's really big old trees that are all splitting and falling down. They're amazing. I mean, I spoke to someone the other day and went, oh, they're all dying. No, they're not, they're still alive. They're ancient and veteran trees there. They're beautiful. Yes, they're absolutely amazing trees. They're just like... So, ancient woodland, as a term, just to jargon bust it for you so we know what we're talking about. Ancient woodland, it's a planning and conservation designation, and it's based on the principle that it's been continuous woodland since 1600 AD. Anyone hazard a guess as to why 1600 AD? Yeah. It is really to do with, that's the point at which they consider a lot more trees were imported and planted and brought in, and people started creating large estates and started importing trees, bringing in horse chestnut and a whole variety of other species that weren't native to the UK. So anything that they had continuous woodland since that time is considered ancient woodland. The interesting thing is I used to work at Ashton Common near Leatherhead. That's common land. That had more ancient and interesting trees on it than the neighbouring Newton Wood, which was ancient woodland. Yet common land isn't listed on the ancient woodland inventory, which is a bit of a shortfall, I think. You know, we had 2,500 ancient oak pollards on Ashted, in excess of 600 years old. I think there were 3 trees in Newton Wood that were over 300 years old. So, you know, I'm a bit cautious with classifications because I understand why they're there, but they don't always tell the full story. But ancient woodland, long term, ancient semi-natural woodland. The reason it's semi-natural is because there is no natural woodland in the UK. Because we've been cutting it down, chopping it, harvesting it, planting it, doing stuff to it, grazing our animals in it since we've been here, really. And we don't have wild grazing animals anymore, apart from if you go to Bleanwoods in Kent, where they've reintroduced bison and a few other places. So it's semi-natural. But in Brockham, there's 11 sites, total of 30 hectares in that parish. Some of the other parishes have more. So, interesting little natural resource. Pause, plantations for ancient woodland. So that's where you've had an ancient woodland site, it's been covered in trees for some time, but someone, either a private landowner, but quite often, as in the case of the one that's in Betchworth near Strew Green, the Forestry Commission come along, plant a load of conifers on it, turn it into a plantation. The reason it's classified is because it can be turned back, because a lot of the plants that are living on the ground flora are ancient woodland plants, and they're there, and they will do better. So you can actually restore a plantation to a more natural woodland. You can't create ancient woodland. And I always say this to audiences because you see ministers and various people from HS2 and that go on TV, go, oh, we planted a woodland. It's never going to be an ancient woodland. You cannot create ancient woodland. Ancient woodland, by definition, has had to have trees on it since 1600. You can't magic that up. You can create woodland, which I'll show you in a bit, and you can create woodland that has biodiversity interests, but you cannot create ancient woodland. And ancient woodland's about 7% of Surrey. So that's not all the woodland, there's lots of other woodland in Surrey, but about 7%. Which seems quite low, but it's relatively high if you compare it to some counties. My brother lives in Lincolnshire, and their ancient woodland is significantly less. It's all been grubbed out and ploughed. Ancient trees. What are ancient trees? Very old trees. When I was at Ashton, I used to attend the Ancient Tree Forum meetings, and I spent hours discussing what an ancient tree was and a veteran tree. At the end of the day, an ancient tree is a very, very old tree for its age, for its species. So for the one on the left, which is a rowan, sometimes called a mountain ash, that would be 200 years old. 200-year-old rowan, and I've seen some in the Peak District. That's an ancient tree. For Scots pine, it'd be 700. What about an oak? 600. More than that. 900. Yeah, that's right. So you've heard it. So there's an old adage about oak trees in the right place take 300 years to grow, 300 years doing their thing, and 300 years declining in. I forgot the term they use now, but in decline. So a yew tree by 1,000. Really old trees. They're very slow growing, they've been around a long time. So the term ancient tree is relative to the species of tree that you're looking at. Some trees are much younger. So what's a veteran tree? What's the difference between the two? And it's worth knowing this because when you're doing surveys of the parishes, then one of the things that I would advocate we do is we do tree surveys, and we try and identify our ancient and veteran trees. So unlike an ancient tree, it can be any age. The key thing with it is it has characteristics that are similar to an ancient tree. So, and you can make veteran trees. You can't create an ancient tree. It has to be old. It has to have been there for however many years. But you can create. And at Ashton, we used to create veteran trees by damaging them and doing stuff to trees to create the conditions. So some of the conditions will be fungi, which are a natural part of the process, all the invertebrates that live in those trees, and then other things like bats and birds, owls and things. So, and that damage can be caused by people like myself doing conservation work, working with tree surgeons. It can be natural damage. We had a tree that was veteranized by a lightning storm. It got struck by lightning. And I don't really know, but oak trees, their bark, the water runs down it like little rivulets, and they're really good conductors of lightning. And it burst out, blew out a whole bit of the tree, and that started to rot and got occupied by fungi and started to get colonised. So they can be created a number of ways. But basically, we're looking at trees that have interest for biodiversity. All ancient trees are veteran trees, but not all veteran trees are ancient. So it's very much an age thing. So in the description that Wildlife Trust gave us of the habitats and stuff, they use this term habitats of principal importance. So this is quite important if these are the things that you want to know if you're doing funding, because if you're doing work on them, it's going to attract more funding. So in our area, it's a wood pasture and parkland. And we're quite lucky in some ways because we have a number of old estates that still function within our area. And those estates have tended to be managed. So, like the Betchworth one, they still farm beef through grass grazing. So it's low intensity, free ranging cattle over a large area, and that creates interest. You might occasionally see me poking around in dung piles. I'm looking for dung beetles, stuff. So it tracks a whole catalogue of insects and other variety of animals as part of that process. Lowland Beach and New Woodlands on Box Hill and the North Downs, which we referred to earlier. So there's the Betchworth estate looking towards the Downs, and obviously the Downs is the where the Ewan Beach is. I love the term they think. I think someone sits somewhere in an office and just adds more and more terms to these things. So lowland mixed deciduous broadleaf woodland. Basically, it's woodland without conifers in. And lowland is to determine it separate from highland, so woodlands that you find in mountains are slightly different. So we've got those in all 4 parishes. They exist. Wet woodland, it's quite unique. So if you walk along the mole, you'll see alder and alder carn, you'll see willows growing, you'll see a lot of scrub. Behind my house there's a whole load of thorny scrub going down to the river that's unique habitat. When I first moved there, I think I'd been there a week and I saw a nightingale. So it's brilliant habitat for that. We think we heard one this year, but I haven't heard one for ages. So it's a really, really interesting habitat. Lots of breeding birds, a lot of warblers. Traditional orchards. Are you aware of any in your area? So it's worth putting those on. They particularly are interesting because they have often rare species or rare varieties of apple and pear in them, but they do also support certain animals. So things like the lesser spotted woodpecker, it really likes for some reason old orchards. The edibles team at RHS Wisley I'm doing some work with are doing a lot of work with orchards at the moment, and they've been to the one at Lye. I mentioned the one at Lye because I know it's not in our area, but I've been there with these people who've done some work there. Really interesting sites, they're fantastic sites. And if people have got land and they want to plant trees, I always say to people, have you thought about an orchard? Maybe, might be an option. I try and encourage councils to do community orchards. We had a bit of success with Brockham Parish Council because they planted along Brockham Lane now, and we stopped Surrey County Council from planting canopy trees, and they planted all fruit-bearing, native fruit-bearing and flowering trees. So, and hedgerows. I love hedgerows, and the hedgerows around here are amazing. One of the key features when you look at landscape assessments for Mole Valley is the number of mixed native species of hedgerows, particularly with large oak trees in. And it's really characteristic of our area. If you go on Google Maps, you can see them. There's just and there's a lot of old hedge lines as well. Some have been left, some have been taken out, but the master trees, the hedgerow trees in them are still there. You can still see them. So why Forest Garden? Why are we here? Because that's lovely. We've got all these woodlands, maybe, and why do we need to think about this from the garden? And one of the things that I'm trying to promote over the last probably 4 years we've been working with Q and that, is to promote a concept of moving from a gardener to a guardian. And hopefully I'll make that clear what I'm talking about as part of that process. So that's our garden. That's taken from our extension. So that's me climbing out the window, scaring my wife Claire, because I'm tottering away with my camera. So we look south. So at the bottom there, between the two big trees, there's like a hedgerow. Well, that's the Greensands Way. That's the path that goes between Brockham Green and the Dolphin. And when the pub, I could try and remember its name now, that was on Brockham Green, was a pub, not a gastro restaurant, we could go out of our back gate and choose to toss a thing. Should we go left to the Dolphin? Should we go right to the other one? We've closed the back gate now. But so we're facing south, so we've got a southerly aspect. There's on the left-hand side of what you're looking at there is a hedgerow. That is the old manorial parish boundary between Brockham and Betchworth Parish. And what you can't see is there's a big ditch, there's a big field ditch the other side of it, a really deep one, that takes water off the fields down to the River Mole. The ARC principle, which you'll hear me refer to quite a lot, is the concept of giving your garden back to nature. And 50%. I'm lucky, Claire's a very patient woman. She's let me put most of the garden back to nature. Fortunately, she loves nature as well. So, but why do we do it? Well, we do it for supporting plants, wild plants. So that's anyone recognise that plant? Some might, because they've heard me talk before. Yeah, who shouted that out? Kevin, because he's got it in his garden, haven't you, Kevin? Yellow rattle. So yes, that's hay rattle, yellow rattle. It's a semi-parasitic plant on grass, really useful for using in your lawns and gardens for helping establish wildflowers. So it's I do a whole separate stuff on that. Birds, look, birds, goldfinches, we get family of goldfinches come regularly to feed on the seeds because we don't deadhead anything until the spring. Flies, I've got something for flies. They get a really bad press, flies. They're beautiful. I do not like that insect. Deep red eyes and a lovely green back. No? And then the link to flies is this fungus. Anyone know what that is? Stinkhorn, yeah. And do you know why I mention it to do with flies? Because it smells of rotting meat. And flies come to it and they help spread the spores. So it's a fungus. That's in our garden. We had it popped up. About 3 of them popped up one year, and then we didn't see them again for a few years, and every now and again they pop up again. So they're all the reasons why we're involved with Royal Botanical Gardens. Q is about this growing wild plants to attract wildlife and supporting fungus. Because fungus is really important to all ecosystems. So woodlands. Plant native trees and shrubs and flowers. That's easy for me to say, isn't it? I can sit here, go out and plant trees and shrubs and flowers in your garden. But there's a little bit of ecology first, because this is about understanding how woodlands function. So when I say to you, we're going to talk about forest gardens, I'm not trying to persuade you to plant a forest in your garden. You may have one but what I'm trying to do is encourage people to understand the concept of layers in ecosystems. So it's about the layers. So in a woodland system, a natural woodland system, there's native woodlands, all those things that we saw at the beginning that are of interest. One thing that's common to them all, they may vary in species, is the fact that they will all have this overstory or canopy layer of trees, really big trees. Now, they might be beech, they might be ash, they might be oak, depending on the soils, but that canopy layer. And then below that, you'll have smaller species of trees. There might be rowan, there might be cherry, crabapple. And then you have a layer of shrubs, the pink ones, and that might be things like hawthorn and guelder rose. And then you come down a bit to what they call the herbaceous crops there, but the flowers basically. Bluebells, primrose. Fungus, we mustn't forget the fungus, because they're involved in all those, they get involved with all those plants, including the trees. Ground cover stuff's really important, really valuable, and we'll talk about that with gardening. The root layer, that's the bit. I'm doing a project at college at the moment to do with invisible places, and I chose to do the invisible place that's under our feet, the place we never think about, soil. Soil's really important, and the relationship between fungi and roots of plants and and those plants that grow with tubers in that root layer are really, really important to the woodland ecosystem, and we forget them. We tend to focus on the trunks and the leaves and forget the really important bit, and then the things that live in there with them. So the earthworms and the wood lice and the millipedes and the centipedes and stuff. So that is a really simple diagram. I love this diagram. It's quite colourful. I do like colour, and but it really explains quite clearly all the different layers. And you could see how you could create that in your garden. You don't have to have 100 trees. You could have one fairly large tree, and then a smaller tree, and then a couple of shrubs, some climbers, some honeysuckle. It's very easy to create that in a way. And bear in mind that you can still create that starting with the smaller tree species. You don't have to have an oak tree. You can start with a smaller species as long as you create those. And this principle applies to all ecosystems and habitats. So it applies to your lawn. So when I do the talks about managing grassland and lawns for biodiversity, I talk about layers. If you come on a pond course that I'm doing, then I'll talk about the levels in the pond and the different levels. If you're on a seashore, it's about so it's the same process. It's a really basic process. So if you're starting from scratch or you're modifying your garden, that's what I'm trying to get across. The key point is think about the layers. If you can't get a tree in, how could you create the effect of a tree in, say, a courtyard garden? Yeah, well, arbour, yeah, like an arbour or trellising, and you grow climbers up it. So you can still create that effect even in quite small gardens. So forest garden's not about planting a woodland in your garden. It's just about understanding how woodlands work, and then applying those to your garden in how you create them and you maintain them. And often when I go and visit people, often they've actually got all the features in there, they just haven't thought about them this way, and with a little bit of extra stuff, a little bit of extra planting, maybe shrub layers, they can improve that habitat. That's probably what we'll end up talking about tomorrow, I suspect. So back to our garden again. So how does that principle apply to our garden? So yeah, we have mature trees. So that's a cherry. There's another cherry on the left-hand side. What you can't see is, I don't know whether anyone walks on the Greenshands Way there. There's a little bit where you go through a little bridge through over the ditch. Our garden is that garden on the corner. It's the one with all the solar panels and the blue shed. There's a big field maple in the corner of our garden. It's massive. It's got about, well, it did have 5 stems. It's down to 3. Two have blown over in storms over the years. Really, really big tree. Really interesting tree because it's on the parish and manor boundary and it's on a major long distance path. So it's what we would call a heritage tree or a notable tree. People would have navigated, in the past people would have navigated by mature trees. A bit further up, going into Betchworth, there's an oak on the same path which has got little owls in it and tawny owls. So fruit trees, yeah, we've got apple tree, a whole variety of other fruit trees. We've got a lot of native fruit trees. Hedgerow on that side. You'll notice I don't have a hedge cut. I don't cut my hedge all through the year. And when I talk about this, when I have people come, some of you may have come to the garden visit, you'll have heard me spout this already. Trees don't grow constantly. They do grow constantly if you cut them because they think they're being eaten. So I never understand why people trim their hedges constantly through the summer, because all that happens is they carry on growing, so you have to cut them again. So I accept if it's on a footway and you're blocking it, then you do have a thing. But the school, when I did the work with Brockham School, they've stopped cutting the inside of the hedge. They didn't believe me. They thought it was going to come out, but it stops growing after a while and it flowers. So in our hedgerow we've got privet and it flowers, the most beautiful creamy flower, and it flowers because we don't cut it during the year. I do cut trees, I cut them in the winter. I coppice and pollard sections of the hedge in the winter, and I do different bits each year. Flowering shrubs, yeah, so I always talk about native plants, and I was pushing native plants, and I bang on about it on all my courses, but I'm not averse to non-native plants. There's the one thing I disagree with the art people. The art people talk about getting rid of non-native ones and plant native ones. I totally disagree. If you've got a non-native plant like this, Mexican orange, and we have viburnum in the garden that was planted previously, that flower out of the season of native ones. They provide extra nectar sources. They're valuable. They have value. So I would never remove anything, just add more. Long grass, short grass, herbs in pots. We tend to collect stuff. We've got a bit of a reputation. People are always giving us stuff. They leave stuff on our doorstep now. So we've got a lot of Belfast sinks, a lot of old tubs and pots. The next to the gazebo there's a concretey thing. There's two of those. They were outside the village hall, and they were going to chuck them away. And Malcolm, bless him, in the road, brought them round in his truck for us. So we're always gathering stuff. But they're good. The only thing about pots is you do have to water them. The rest of that garden is a gravel garden, and I talked about that in my last talk about the value of gravel gardens. But make layers. That's at least twice I've thought that now, maybe three, I'll keep saying it. So layers, it's all about layers. All about layers. And then you can do this, you can apply this principle to gardening for food. And one of the bases of permaculture, and they talk a lot about forest gardens, it's the same process, but what they're talking about is then talking about trees that are not oaks and beech and rowan. They're talking about fruit trees, but the principle's the same. They will still create a canopy, they'll still create a sub-canopy, they'll still put shrubs in, they'll still put the herbs in the root crops, but what they're doing is they're growing things that produce food. And then when you get the real purists who are really good at this, what they do is they plant those things in amongst the rest of the things in their garden. Because, funnily enough, if you plant your fruit and veg in amongst all your other plants, they're actually less vulnerable to being predated than if you stick them in a bed with a big sign that goes, caterpillars come here, here's all my lettuces, or here's all my things. So that's the whole principle about, so the 7 layers of a forest garden are exactly the same as the 7 layers that I would talk about from the point of view for conservation and biodiversity. They're just using different species of plants. And we've done that. We've got black currants and red currants and raspberry and blackberry and all sorts growing in the garden that we go and harvest and we go and get food from. Perennial crops, a lot of perennial crops. So we've got kale and various other things growing in amongst the other plants. Little plea here for deadwood. Really, really don't like bonfires. I'm waiting for the lightning bolt now as I come from Brockham. They get struck down. I'm very careful where I say that because I hate bonfires. I really hate bonfires. They chuck loads of CO2 and stuff in the air and carbon monoxide, and they burn wood, which is a really valuable resource. That's okay for burning if you've got a log burning stove and you're trying to stop using fossil fuels, but just burning stuff for the sake of it. I don't burn any of the cuttings. You've seen how many trees and shrubs we've got in our garden. I don't burn any of them. I don't chip them. I dead hedge them. I lay them into dead hedges on our boundary, so we don't burn anything. And the reason I'm so anti it is because I worked for so long on Ashton Common, which was renowned for its deadwood and deadwood invertebrates, so things like stag beetle and various other species that live in the wood and thrive on the wood, and the fungi that rely on it. So I'm all into promoting log piles, not burning stuff. They provide homes for other stuff as well. Log piles are really good for toads and newts, frogs and things, and slow worms when they're trying to avoid extremes of weather. Frost free as well in the winter, they provide a little bit of shelter. And the larvae, of course, are eaten by birds. So woodpeckers and things will come along and feed on the beetle larvae. So deadwood's really, really important thing. So what to plant? I always get asked this. There is a species list, so you will get a copy of this talk. So I will send Norman a PDF version, and it's got a species list, which you'll see a bit later on. But I picked out a few things, and the reason I picked these ones out is just to sort of try and celebrate other aspects of those things. It's not just about planting it because we think it's the right thing for wildlife. There are other very good reasons why we might want to plant certain things. And some of you have been to my talks. I know Simon's heard this off me already, but I'm really, really anti-tree planting programs. I've really got a real thing about it, a bugbear about it, because often people are planting the wrong tree in the wrong place. I'm all about the right tree in the right place. They're brilliant. They're great for wildlife, flowers and berries. They're a really good component of forest gardening, but right tree, right place. It's really important when you select a tree, when you think about trees for your land or your garden, is what's that tree going to be like in 50 years' time? What's it going to be like in 20 years' time? How tall is it going to be? How broad is it going to be? How far are the roots going to spread? You bear in mind that the roots of trees go at least the height of the tree. That's how far they spread. So if you toppled the tree, the roots go. So have they got room? Is there space for... So when I look at what councils do sometimes, and particularly Surrey County Council planting trees, why are you planting a tree that big in a little hole when there's a pavement there and a road there? How bonkers is that? I just don't understand. So it's about thinking about that and thinking about the appropriate and finding one appropriate. And there will be appropriate trees and shrubs suitable for any size garden. Flowering and fruiting are the best. And think about how you can manage it. You know, do you know what coppicing is? Do you know what pollarding is? And if you don't, you can find out. And we teach it, but pruning trees, so you can manage most hardwood trees, not conifers. You cut a conifer, that's it. It doesn't resprout. The branches that are left will grow and get more mature, but they don't resprout the same as hardwood trees. And hardwood trees you can cut and coppice, you can shred. The French shred them. You may have seen it if you've gone to France. You see these really tall straight trees, little branches up the side. So they have a system they call shredding, and they cut the branches off and use it for feeding animals and stuff, and they resprout and they will regrow. So just thinking about that as part of the process. So my go-to tree, rowan. I love this tree. I'm a bit hooked on it because I went to university in Nottingham and I did my research in the Peaks, and I saw a lot of these when I was in the Peaks. It is actually our company name, Sorbus Learning. It's not my birthday, it's the boss's birthday. So if you ever looked up, we were looking for names of companies, and my birth tree is the oak, Quercus. If you Google Quercus or you go on business lines, you wouldn't believe how many companies there are in England called Quercus. We only found 2 with Sorbus, which is why we chose it. So it's Lady of the Mountains. Celtic calendar. If you come on my tree courses, you'll hear more about this. But the Celts were seriously into trees. They had an alphabet and a calendar all based around trees. So that's from Claire and Monroe's birthdays in that period. Slow growing is Columar, so it grows up. It doesn't spread too much. Perfect tree for a garden. It often gets ignored as a garden tree. Lovely flowers, beautiful cream cluster of flowers, attracts a load of insects. 160 species have been recorded on rowan trees in the UK. It's quite a lot. It's quite high up there. 14 solely living on rowan. That's why I keep banging on about native plants, because there are some insects that will only feed on one species of plant, and it's a native one. If you don't provide it, they can't complete their life cycles. Beautiful red berries. Feed the birds, so fieldfare, redwing, thrushes feed on them quite a lot. And all the insects that feed on them, food for the little baby chicks of all the other birds that are nesting in your garden. If there's any diabetics in the room, sorbos is used from this plant to make a sugar substitute for diabetics. No, from the berries. From the berries. It's a quiz question, that. Park that in your head. Christmas quiz is coming up. Might be in there. It came up once. It's come up in one quiz I've been to. Climbers, ivy. Really, really interesting as well. The thing is about trees as well is that trees is a body shape, and we're not on a tree course, but just share that with you now. It's a body shape, it's not a group of plants, it's not a genetic classification. It's a whole variety of plants have become trees, and ivy's part of the ginseng family. Really interesting plant. It's in the Celtic. Celts valued ivy. It does not kill trees, and I'll explain more about that in tree courses, but it's not a parasite. It merely uses things to climb on. It's really, really good for insects because it flowers so late. It flowers in late autumn, early winter. It's an effective antibiotic. You can produce antibiotics from it. It's a really useful plant. Anyone know what that insect is? Probably a bit hard to see there. So it's a European hornet. So we have hornets nesting in our garden. They feed on their wasps, bees, hoverflies, butterflies, and then the ivy bee feeds solely on ivy. And sometimes you may have seen these and not know what they are. They look a bit like honeybees. They emerge really late in autumn, and they're not colony bees, but they all come out together, and they all fit. And often people get called, the friends who look after collect honeybees, often get called to them because they look so similar, but they're not. And they're familiar because they're around and really active around September, October time. But that's a little one on the right, so looks very similar to a honeybee, but they only feed on ivy. Flowers, there's a whole range of woodland flowers, but primrose I put in because its association being the first rose, it blossoms really early. And again, it's another one of those plants that's really important for bees early in the season. Produces separate male and female flowers. I didn't know this, I learnt this doing this presentation. I should know this because I studied ants when I was at uni. But the seeds are collected by ants and they spread them. They take them into their nests. And that's how primroses spread around meadows. Often the yellow meadow ant is taking them as food, and some of them eventually sprout. So, again, nectar. Used to be used for treating gout and rheumatism. So we talk about this a lot with Kew, is about pushing the other side of plants and their other interests, as well as being beautiful things. Historically, we've used them for all sorts of purposes. And love potions. The roots, so that root area I was talking about, the plants that are living in there, really good to bear this in mind. I get asked a lot by people about planting and flowers in shady areas. Bulb plants are really good for shady areas. Most of them, the native ones, are woodland plants. They're adapted with little packages of energy to give them a quick head start at the season, because they've got to flower and reproduce before the trees come into leaf and they go into shade. So I love the old names of these things: witches' thimbles, crotos. They grow really well in shaded areas. They attract a whole load of insects, and their bulbs are food for voles. The voles eat them. And we used to make glue out their bulbs. So who knew? And there you go. If you've got any Elizabethan ruffs hidden away in your wardrobe at home, you can use your bluebell bulbs to stiffen them before you go to a party. So Norman asked me to do a little bit about planting. Obviously it's not a tree planting course. It's quite difficult to demonstrate tree planting sat in a hall, but there's a few things that I want to get across, and I've been asked questions by some of you about a couple of methods to do with how we take parish councils forward doing tree planting. So there's the species list. You'll get that. It is in the presentation. So they are the top, I'll say 10, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. There's more than that, it's 12 because I included Rowan. They're the lists that are recommended by the Wildlife Trusts, Woodland Trust, National Trust. Those are as garden suitable trees. And then there's some climbers and some flowers and some bulbs. And I saw when you did your surveys, you were surveying for ramsons and bluebells as a group. So There's quite a lot of ramsons along the mole. Wild garlic. So what type of tree? It can be really daunting if you're not used to buying trees. You go into a garden centre and there's a whole plethora of these things. And the first thing I'd say to you if you're going to plant native trees is you don't go to a garden centre. Because there's supermarkets. And I have to be careful. Does anyone work in a garden centre before I get too rude? Most of the people who work in them, I found one exception locally, or two exceptions actually, sorry. Most of the people who work in them aren't horticulturalists. They don't really understand plants. They're just selling a product. It could be baked beans or Weetabix, to be honest. And you can't rely on the source of the plants. So when they say they're native, you can't take it for red. So you need to buy, if you're going to do native planting, you need to buy your plants from a supplier. There's a number of charities that sell plants that they will guarantee that they were grown, they come from and they're grown in the UK. The top one, the big picture, is what I would call a pot-grown plant. The little one on the left is what I call a plug. And the ones on the right with the tubes are what I call whips. And you get them in little bundles. They are the cheapest and the most effective way of planting trees, whips. And the trouble is, we're really impatient as a species. We want trees to be instant. But I'll tell you, I've been planting trees and working in woodlands a really, really long time. And the best trees that we've had are ones that you start with a whip. Because they put a lot of time and energy into growing decent root systems. And then you get strong, healthy trees. I really, really, really dislike pot-grown trees. Because if you've ever looked at them when you get them from the nursery, the roots are all doing that. And they're not going to necessarily create a healthy tree. And most of the time I've been called to people and they show me trees that are looking sick. It's a pot-grown tree that's been planted in a round hole. And I'll explain that in a minute, see soon. I also really, really don't like those. I don't like the plastic, I don't like the stakes, I don't like the density, the way they're planted. And I've worked with volunteers for a long time, and I've been a volunteer. You tell a group of people to plant trees randomly, they will plant them in a pattern. We can't help it. It's in our nature to put them in a pattern, and stuff doesn't grow like that in the wild. So this is why we'll talk about the Miyawaki method in a minute, about a different approach. If you get a pot, and you might get gifted a pot, so don't turn it away, you get gifted a tree, or if you get a potted tree, then you need to plant it in a square hole. Does anyone know why you plant it in a square hole and not a round one? Yeah, because roots can't grow around corners. So if you put a round potted plant in a round hole, what happens is the roots spread out, they find the hard soil and they think, oh, we're in another pot. They effectively pot bind themselves in there. When they grow into there, when they grow into that corner, they don't seem to be able to turn the corner, so they grow out. So what you do is you get growth coming out from the corners. So you get a much healthier planted tree. So some of you may have seen this already, and this is one of the things I got asked to. Miyawaki method. So Miyawaki, he's a well-established botanist from Japan. He did a lot of research into woodlands and trees. He's a really respected man who's done loads of survey. And he initially started looking at how to restore land following tsunamis. And when he looked into it, he realised that all the man-made planted areas of tree and woodland had got flattened by the tsunami, and all the naturally growing areas of woodland survived. But some of the trees got damaged, they got bits broken off them and stuff, but broadly. And then he looked into that, and he did some research, and he started to look into why that was, and why the trees fared better, and then applied that process to planting to create more resilient and effective woodlands. And basically, and I teach this on my tree courses, and when we talk about woodlands, we tend to focus on the tree and see a tree. But trees are like us. They're communal. They live in communities. They live with other trees. They live with other trees of their same species, and they associate with trees of their same species, but they associate with trees of other species as well. And they do that in association with fungi. So planting single trees dotted through system in the way that we've traditionally done in this country, and you see as a result of roadside projects on the side of roads, and you see it as part of HS2, and you see all these things planted, they're doomed to failure because they've not started them off in the right way. They've not put them together. So trees need to be in association with other things, and he's not the only one that does this research. There's a secret. I've got a book at home, Secret Life of Trees. I normally bring it with me, written by a chap who was a German forester, and his observations, and he found trees that had been cut down were still alive, and they were being supported by the trees around them. And there's a lady from Canada in British Columbia who's similar. Her father was in forestry, and she looked into it. She's done loads of research, and again, it's about this relationship with trees. So the Miyawaki method looked at planting trees rather than dotting them. And if you read the guidance, they talk about 1 to 2 metres apart. He just said, right, we get all your trees, get some canopy trees, get some sub-canopy trees, get some shrubs, just plant them all together. Really dense, put them together, and let them all grow. You don't put tree guards around them. Guard the area, because you sometimes have to. So some areas, this is an urban area where this was done, they had to put a fence around it, otherwise some of the trees would get damaged. Although they found out, one of the outcomes of this method was that the trees planted with the Miyawaki, none of them got vandalised. Where something like 25% of the ones with the stakes got vandalised because there was a thing to break and snap off and damage. So, in this project, you've got this sort of half, I don't know what you call it, it's like a half circle, isn't it? That's the traditional planted area, and these trees were planted at the same time. It's about 3 years after. So everything to the right is planted in the traditional way. Everything to the left is planted using that technique. It's no brainer, isn't it? I know, they did loads of research into this, and they looked at surveys and stuff, but you just have to look at that photograph and go, well, yeah, okay. It's not a big area. So that's quite a small area. They talk about the size of a tennis court, but you can do smaller areas. But it's about planting things. So if you're engaged in planting schemes, and I'm looking at particular people I know are talking to parish councils about this, it doesn't have to be the size of a tennis court, but it's about this concept of getting native species of all the different levels, sticking them in together. Have to go. The one thing I need to add to that is that the ground conditions, the soil was treated, not improved, but it was treated, and they added fungal spores to the soil, because that's the missing component. That's the bit that doesn't happen on the right, and the bit that we always forget about. So you can buy fungal spores that are appropriate to the UK and associated with woodland, but that is the other missing factor, the bit that this invisible space that we don't see under our feet. So the combination of planting in association with trees together, of different species of different heights and different characters with fungi, and not in soil improvement. I'm not necessarily talking about adding compost and stuff, but the improvement was through the addition of fungi as opposed to the right hand side, and that is the outcome. I think historically they did when they did the research, and the fungal component was really important. You do get a better response if you plant trees together. I know this because we did it at Ashton without realising. We didn't know about this, we hadn't discovered this, we were just doing it. And Adam and I, who I worked with, we just did it by observation. We found that if we clumped trees together and stuck them in batches, we got a better result. And we often planted around dead trees and piles of dead stuff, and then it was added to because birds help plant as well. So I don't know whether you're familiar with bird physiology, but the first thing birds do when they take off is they poo, and they've often got seeds of the systems. They plant these little seeds with a little deposit of nutrient, so they help create woodland as well. So we had success without really knowing this science. We hadn't seen this science then, but it works much better with the fungal bit. The other way, of doing it is something that we've done for years, which is hedgerow planting. So I can probably be fairly, you know this because you've heard this from me already. I'm really, really dismissive of central government and county council targets for planting trees. With colleagues working for other councils, we did LiDAR surveys and surveys of land, and we worked out there just isn't the capacity to plant on the land, following rules as they stand, to do with liability and space and everything else, the number of trees they say they're going to plant, if you plant them as trees singly. But if you plant them in a hedgerow, you can plant a shed load of trees, and they will mature, but you manage them, you keep them within a scale that's appropriate. And as an advocate, as someone who worked on a site with pollards, I'm used to pollarding and coppicing trees. You can have really, really old, mature, ancient trees and veteran trees that are pollarded and managed. So, and hedgerows are a great place. So one way parish council could get involved is to look at where can we restore hedgerows that have been taken out, where could we add hedgerows appropriately to places rather than, and why plant non-native species, why not plant native species? So that is a really thing, and you can plant 12 trees per square metre through a double row hedge. Just down the road in Redhill we have a national hedge lane champion and his wife run a company who help with hedges and planting hedges and laying hedges. Literally the Matthews, just down the road there. So we have no excuse in this part of the world. We could just be doing it. And if you want any more information about us, you can find us on the website. We do have a Facebook site if you're into social media. We do have an Instagram site as well. I don't do TikTok and stuff, but I do Instagram. That's it.
Paul, we took a group down to NEP, Wall Garden earlier.
You're a hero. I love NEP.
But they were very interesting about the whole native species.
Yeah.
So it said, right, with climate change, I think it's moving north. By the end of the century, we'll have Barcelona climate.
Yeah,
so what do you want?
They're gardeners. Yeah. No, I say that. I shouldn't say that because I love NEP. I really love the NEP estate. We've been going there for years, and we worked. Ted Green, who worked with them to create NEP, in effect, he was the instigator of the NEP process. Worked with us at Ashstead. So there's a link. So we have, and I love the garden. I love the fact that the family allowed them to dig up their croquet lawn and turn it into a really, really wild garden. Certainly I can see the value, and we promote gravel gardens and low drought tolerant gardens. Trees, I think we need to be more cautious about because we don't really know. I think that's the thing. I think they're making suppositions. A, we don't know what the climate's going to be, and B, we don't know how well our trees can survive in those conditions. Because
there's an initiative already happening in the
Yeah.
UK where they are deliberately moving oaks further north, and that's going on at the moment.
Yeah.
Gardens and as long as the early evening London news and lots have a tremendous project, and there's a lot of facts about how many trees they have, but the death of the trees due to climate change is already increased. And there are sprouting trees that will resist cold, surprisingly, and dryness in the caucasus and places like that. Presumably, I think probably got quite a lot of information on that subject for anyone.
I do a lot of work with Kew, and they showed us, we work around. I think the only thing I would say is that and I don't disagree with anything they're saying from the point, but there is a difference between parkland trees and woodland trees, and I think that's the thing I'm cautious about. I think we did the same thing after the storms. I remember the storms, the 80s storms, and the subsequent ones, and the whole country went into a panic started tidying up and trying to plant trees, and some organisations didn't, and they've proved to be right because those trees have resprouted. And a good example of that is Now Wood. If any of you are Surrey Wildlife Trust members, I don't know whether you know this, but you can visit Now Wood. You're allowed to visit. You just have to ring up and check that there's no kids there, and they'll tell you. But if you get a chance and you haven't been there, go there and have a look at some of the storm-blown trees that blew over in those storms, and they've all resprouted. And they've all regrown. And I think there's a big difference between trees that we get in parks and trees that are living in a community in a woodland. And I'm not sure they have science. So I wouldn't say to these people, you shouldn't be looking at alternatives. And I can understand why NEP have talked about it in the garden, because they're talking about garden plants and we promote gravel gardens because I am always promoting about drought-free planting, and I use herbs quite a lot because they're good for wildlife and they're drought tolerant. But I'm a bit cautious about suddenly all rushing out and changing trees, and what I'm nervous about is introducing trees from elsewhere, because we did that with ash. We brought trees in from, and some were brought in by charities who should have known better. And they brought them in from stocks from Denmark and places, and we now have ash dieback. So I'm really a bit like cautious about it. Stuff, if it's given the time, can change and develop and respond. So yeah, it's a bit of a mixed bag, really. I'm always nervous about talking about climate stuff because no one really knows. I'm not a denier. I can see it. I can see. I've lived long enough to see. I can see the seasonal changes. You can
see the picture stuff.
Yeah, some stuff. Yeah, and it's periodic. Sometimes some years they do well. Other times they.
But there seem to be different ones. We've got two things outside. There's one struggles.
Yeah.
And it's hot and dry.
Yeah.
And the other struggles when it's cold and wet. So there's definitely something different between them.
And where they're planted?
They're planted on the edge of Bromley Field, which is the field that goes between the A25 and the Red Line. They're just outside the garden. They're 30 years old.
Yeah.
Because they're planted on really well.
Okay, I think just one more question.
Yeah, you were talking about planting obviously deals influence and that we all tend to plant, with a passion.
Yeah.
And the thing that came up to my mind immediately at that point, because I went through that voluntarily, was that they are planting trees in rows, trees that would be large trees eventually, but very close together. And is that sort of that they then select for the ones that are...
They might be.
Yeah. This is the start of the journey for these, I don't know.
Yeah. No, some old established forestry practices, you plant loads of trees, some die and you weed some out and then you pick the best ones. But that's forestry. In a woodland system, we used to plant loads of stuff and accept that some might die, and that's part of the process. If you're planting large mature trees, you then have to manage them.
Is it because they're doing agroforestry?
Yeah, probably.
I think so. I think they're doing agroforestry, and so they want to be able to underplant or graze in between those rows.
Yeah. You can get a lot of trees in a small space.
It wasn't industrial science.
No.
No, it's agroforestry.
Anyone hazard a guess how many trees I've got in my garden? How many trees I've got in my garden? Because we don't have a big garden. I mean, it's not a small garden, but it's. Anyone has to guess?
30.
The last count at 67. Last count. So that's quite a small area. But then we manage those trees. So some we manage by coppicing, some we manage by pollarding, some we don't have to manage. They get managed by the trees around them. So you can get a lot of trees in a small space. But I think what you're talking about, you're quite right, is probably agroforestry. They're possibly looking for a crop. So it may be that, because if you grow, say you grow oak, for example, if you grow a whole lot of oak together close, they grow straight tall. So remember I said about trees as a body shape, it's not a genetic classification? I said that in the talk. So you can affect that body shape. So foresters grow trees close together. The reason they do that is they don't grow loads of side branches and they go straight up because they're looking for light. Because a forester wants a really straight, tall tree. Someone who's growing trees for fruit wants a tree that spreads that you can reach. And traditionally, you wouldn't want to climb up a ladder, and you didn't have machines, so you want a tree that can spread out. So you can manage the shape of trees, and you can do that in your garden. You can have all those trees. I coppice our hedgerow, so we have hazel, a lot of hazel in it, and elm, and various other trees, and I coppice them, and I use the rods in our garden. Our neighbours use them for their bean poles and stuff, and then we lay stuff in the hedge, and then they resprout. So you can have a lot of trees in a small space.
This is the very last question.
We had an enormous cherry tree.
Yeah.
And our neighbour hated killing the tree.
Yeah.
It was on the edge. So he would literally down the side of this cherry tree. And it grew enormous boughs going out into our garden.
Yeah.
Does it hurt the tree in any way?
No, you can harm trees. It's really hard to kill a hardwood tree. You know, I mean, when they talk about Stone Age people clearing forest, it's like near impossible. If you ever try cutting a tree with a chainsaws and then you try a metal axe, it's hard enough. So it is hard to kill trees. You can poison them, you can burn them, the stumps. Animals can graze them out. It's quite hard to cut them. But on a tree that's on a boundary, you have no entitlement to light. You can cut anything that encroaches onto your property, provided that it doesn't harm the tree. So you're not allowed to do it to harm the tree, and you're meant to offer the cuttings back to the person who the tree belongs to. They don't have to take them, but you should. But technically, it's your property. So, yeah. The trees will adapt. Trees will grow. Has anyone been to Wisman's Wood?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. What is it distinctive about that? What do you remember about? Because they're oak trees.
They're dwarf.
Yeah, they're dwarfs.
Covered in lichen,
Yeah.
And they're amazing.
Yeah.
They're twisted.
They're just but they're not much taller than that, are they? Than that projector there. But they're oak trees and they're really old. So you can change. Trees can change their shape according to their conditions. They can respond to someone chopping all the branches off on one side, and they'll grow the other way. They'll respond to weather, and that's weather when you get to Dartmoor, isn't it? It's cold and wind.
Right, that's it.
He wants to go home.
We're going to let Paul go. But Paul mentioned a couple of times that he's produced a handout with all his slides, all the information on it. So if you have emailed me at biodiversityinitiative1@gmail.com, then I can send you it directly. I'll also put a link into the WhatsApp group. Are you all in the Nature WhatsApp group? Most of you? Well, if you'd like to join, I have a card here with the link.
It's his way of snagging you.
Yeah. But anyway, I mean, all that remains, I think, is to thank Paul. It's so good to have a neighbour like Paul who's so knowledgeable and who walks the talk and is able to share his knowledge and his lovely, beautiful garden every year. So
I like learning as well. That's the other thing. I think I can't say that enough to people. I promote lifelong learning. I mean, we've both run teaching companies, slightly different ones, but we like learning. When I'm back at college, I was telling you, wasn't I? So I'm a full-time student again. I started on the 2nd of September doing art and design. So it's never too...
No, and I think everybody here is also a lifelong learner.
Yeah, lifelong learning.
Thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you. Need the glasses.